I still remember the smell of the henna. Sweet, earthy, like something ancient pressing itself into your skin, claiming you, marking you before you even understood what was being marked. The women in my mother's kitchen sang as they painted my hands, those swirling beautiful patterns that crept up my wrists like vines, like shackles dressed up as flowers. I sat very still, the way I had been taught to sit, the way girls like me were taught to exist. Quietly, obediently, taking up as little space as possible. I was 12 years old, and somewhere across the village, a 57-year-old man was preparing to make me his wife. Sister, if you're watching this right now, maybe while the kids are asleep, maybe with a cup of tea going cold beside you, maybe because something in the title pulled at a part of you that you don't let people see, I need you to stay with me. Because what I'm about to tell you is the truest thing I have ever said out loud. And I have spent 23 years being afraid to say it. My name is Nadia. And I was sold. Not in a metaphor. Not as a figure of speech. My father sat across from a man older than my grandfather and agreed on a price, a date, and a dress color. And that was the sum total of my future being decided. I was not in the room. Girls like me were never in the room where our lives were bartered away. Let me take you back. Let me take you all the way back to before the henna, before the white dress that felt less like celebration and more like something being closed over me like a lid. I grew up in a small village in northern Morocco. Not the Morocco the travel magazines show you. Not the rose-gold sunsets over the Medina or the blue city of Chefchaouen. I mean the Morocco of cracked mud walls and water carried in heavy jugs and girls who disappeared from school around the time their bodies started changing, and nobody asked where they went. My mother had 7 children. 5 girls, 2 boys. The boys, my brothers Tariq and Youssef, sat with my father at meals. They went to school without anyone questioning it. They had futures that were talked about openly, proudly, the way you talk about something you actually intend to build. We girls were talked about differently. We were talked about in terms of what we might cost and what we might one day bring. Not bring as in contribute, bring as in deliver. Deliver honor. Deliver alliance. Deliver sons to another family's name. I understood this before I had words for it. The way you understand cold before you understand temperature. My oldest sister Fatima was married at 14. My sister Huda was married at 15. By the time I was 10, I was already doing the math in my own small terrified heart, counting down like a clock I had no power to stop. My mother loved me. I have to believe that. I have to, because if I don't, there's a grief in me that has no floor. But her love lived inside a cage she had been placed in so long ago that she no longer saw the bars. She would braid my hair with such tenderness some mornings, her fingers gentle, her humming soft, and then in the same breath remind me to lower my gaze when the neighbor men passed. Eyes down, Nadia. A girl who looks too freely invites disaster. I didn't know what disaster meant yet. I would learn. The morning my father told me, I was in the kitchen helping knead dough. My hands were dusted white with flour. I remember that. I remember the flour, because it's strange what your mind holds onto when everything else is falling apart. He didn't ask me to sit down. He didn't soften his voice or search for careful words. He stood in the doorway and he said, "You're getting married in 40 days. His name is Hassan Al-Soussi. He is a good man. A man of means." I looked at my mother. Just for a second. Just long enough to beg her silently. "Please say something, please stop this, please be my mother right now." She kept her eyes on the dough. "How old is he?" I whispered. It was barely a sound. My father's expression didn't change. Old enough to provide. I found out later through my cousin Samira, who had a way of finding out everything. 57. He was 57 years old. He had already buried 1 wife. He had adult children, a son who was nearly 20. He wanted a young wife. He wanted specifically someone young. And my father had looked at me, his 12-year-old daughter with flour on her hands, and said yes. That night, I lay on the mat I shared with my sister Huda, and I listened to the dark. There were sounds I had always found comforting. The distant bark of a dog, my mother shifting in the next room, the wind against the metal roof. But that night those sounds felt like the sounds of a world that was continuing without caring what happened to me. A world that would wake up tomorrow and cook breakfast and carry water and haggle in the market while I was handed over like livestock at a trade. My girlhood, whatever small, ordinary, tender thing it had been, died quietly that night without a funeral. And I didn't even know yet how much worse it was going to get. They brought him to our home on a Thursday. I know it was a Thursday because the market had been that morning, and the smell of fresh bread and cumin still hung in the air when his car pulled up outside our gate. A car. That was the first thing my father mentioned. He has a car, Nadia. Do you understand what that means? As if the possession of a vehicle was sufficient reason to hand over a child. As if 4 wheels and an engine could compensate for 45 years of age difference and a little girl's silent screaming. I was not supposed to be seen. That was the arrangement. The women stayed in the back rooms while the men conducted their business in the front sitting room. The good sitting room, the one we only opened for guests, with the embroidered cushions my mother had spent 2 years making by hand. I was supposed to stay in the kitchen with my sisters. I was supposed to be invisible. But I looked. Of course I looked. I pressed myself against the wall beside the hallway and I peered through the gap in the curtain, because some part of me needed to see the face of the man who was purchasing my future. Hassan Al-Soussi was not a monster in the way stories prepare you for monsters. He didn't have cruel eyes or a twisted mouth. He was simply old. Profoundly, undeniably old in the way that made my stomach turn cold when I tried to imagine standing next to him. His hair was white at the temples, and he walked with the careful deliberateness of a man whose knees had begun to betray him. He wore a nice jalaba, dark green, well pressed. He carried prayer beads in his left hand, moving them slowly with his thumb, the way men do when they want to appear pious. He sat across from my father and he smiled. A comfortable smile. The smile of a man who was used to getting what he wanted. And what he wanted was me. I watched my father pour tea with both hands, the gesture of respect, and something lurched inside my chest. My father was honoring this man. He was pouring tea for the man who was going to take his 12-year-old daughter and call it marriage. I pressed my hand over my mouth so no sound could escape. My mother found me in the hallway. Her eyes went wide for just a moment, the flash of a woman caught between her instinct to protect and her conditioning to comply. She gripped my arm and pulled me back toward the kitchen, her fingers tight, her face a mask I had seen her wear my whole life. Controlled. Unreadable. Armored. Go back inside, she whispered. Ummi. My voice was barely air. Ummi, please. How can Baba do this? How can you let him? She didn't answer right away. She turned me away from the curtain and held my face in both her hands, those rough, capable hands that had washed me and fed me and braided my hair since before I could remember. And I saw something move behind her eyes. Something that looked just for a second like grief. Your Baba knows what is best, she said. Hassan is a respected man. He will provide for you. You will have a home. Security. I don't want security, I whispered, and I could feel the tears beginning, burning at the corners of my eyes. I want to stay home. I want to finish school. Ummi, I want. What you want? She said it so quietly it barely made a sound. Not cruel. Not dismissive. Just defeated. Like a woman repeating something she herself had once been told. So many times it had replaced the original thought. Nadia, what you want doesn't change what is. I survived it. Your sister survived it. You will survive it too. Survive it. That was the inheritance she was offering me. Not joy. Not dignity. Not a life I had chosen. Just survival. The barest, most stripped-down version of being alive. I looked at my mother, truly looked at her maybe for the first time, and I saw her not as my mother but as a woman. A woman who had been where I was standing. A woman who had also been handled and traded and taught to call her cage a home. And she had survived it so completely, so thoroughly, that she was now holding the door of the cage open for her own daughter. That was the moment something cracked inside me. Not broke, not yet. Just cracked. A hairline fracture running straight through the center of everything I thought I understood about love. In the days that followed, the house filled with a particular kind of noise that I came to dread. Women came to visit, aunts, neighbors, my mother's friends, and they talked about the wedding the way women talk about weather, about market prices, about ordinary things. Such a good match. A man of means. You are lucky, Nadia, some girls get nobody. They said lucky and they seemed to mean it. And I sat in the corner of the room while their voices washed over me and I thought, is this what lucky feels like? My aunt, my father's sister, a wide woman with heavy gold earrings and opinions she sharpened on other people, took my chin in her hand one afternoon and turned my face side to side like she was evaluating fruit at a stall. "She's pretty enough," she announced to the room. "But she needs to learn to smile. Men don't like a sour face." I was 12 years old and a grown woman was instructing me to smile for the man who was buying me. I went to the bathroom and sat on the cold tile floor and shook. There was one moment, just one, where I thought my mother might choose me. It was late, 4 or 5 nights before the wedding. I couldn't sleep. I crept to the kitchen for water and found her sitting alone at the table in the dark, her hands wrapped around a cold glass of tea, staring at nothing. She didn't hear me at first. And I stood there watching her face in the thin light, and I saw something so naked in her expression, something so unguarded and private, that I understood with every cell in my body that she knew. She knew this was wrong. "Ummi," I said softly. She startled, looked at me, and for 3 full seconds I saw my mother, my real mother, the one underneath the conditioning and the fear and the decades of submission, looking back at me. Her eyes were wet. I walked to her and I took her hand. "Please," I whispered. "Please, Ummi. Tell Baba no. Just say no. You're his wife. He listens to you when you—" "He doesn't listen to me." Her voice was a stone dropping into still water. Final. Heavy. Sinking. "He has never listened to me. About anything." She squeezed my hand once. Just once, a small pulse of pressure, like a message in a language only the two of us spoke. Then she let go. She stood up, set her glass in the sink and walked back to her room. She never raised her voice for me. Not once. Not ever. And I have spent years, sister, trying to forgive her for that silence. Trying to understand that she was a prisoner too. Handing me her chains because she didn't know what else to offer. Trying to love her without bleeding over it. Some days I succeed. Some days I am still standing in that dark kitchen, holding a hand that just let me go. The morning of the wedding came fast and merciless, the way bad things always do. I sat in the center of the room while the women prepared me. My hair was set. My face was painted. The white dress was eased over my head. Heavy fabric stiff with embroidery, like wearing someone else's idea of beauty. The henna on my hands had dried overnight into deep rust-red patterns, beautiful and inescapable, and I stared at them while the women ululated around me. Ooh, that high, trilling sound of celebration that I will never, for the rest of my life, be able to hear without my chest seizing up. My sister Huda sat beside me for a moment, just before they came to take me to the ceremony. She was 16. She had been married for a year. She took my hennaed hand in hers and held it, and she didn't say a word, and I didn't say a word. And somehow that silence was the most honest thing anyone gave me that entire day. She knew. She remembered. I looked at myself in the small mirror propped against the wall. A child's face above a woman's dress. Wide dark eyes that understood something terrible was beginning. A mouth that had been told in every possible way that it had no right to speak. I was 12 years old. And the door was opening. "Sister, I know this is heavy. I know. But please stay with me. Because this is where it gets darker before it gets light. And the light, when it comes, it changes everything." The house smelled like a stranger. That is the first thing I remember about my new life. Not the size of the rooms, not the furniture, not even the face of the man I now belonged to. Just the smell. Foreign and closed in, like air that had been breathed by people I didn't know for decades before I arrived. There were no smells of my mother's kitchen here. No cumin, no charcoal smoke. No particular sweetness that meant home. Just the heavy, settled smell of a life I had not chosen and did not know how to inhabit. I was 12 years old, and I was in a stranger's house, and every night I cried into a pillow that smelled like nothing I had ever loved. Let me tell you what nobody tells you about a life like mine. People hear child bride, and they imagine one terrible moment, one night, one violation, one clear line where everything breaks. And yes, there was that. There was a wedding night I will not describe to you because I have chosen, and that choice is the first freedom I ever exercised, not to give that memory more air than it has already stolen from me. What I will tell you is this. I was 12 years old and I was terrified, and I lay in the dark afterward and made myself as small as possible and stared at the ceiling and thought, this is what I am now. This is what I am. Not who. What. That is what they took from me first, not my innocence, not my childhood, though they took those too. They took my sense of being a who, a person with an inside. They replaced it with a what, a function, a role, a body assigned to a purpose with no one asking whether the body had thoughts or dreams, or a name it wanted to grow into. Hassan was not violent. I want to say that clearly because violence takes many shapes and I don't want you to miss the shape his took. He didn't beat me. He didn't scream or throw things. What he did was quieter and in some ways more suffocating. He treated me the way you treat something that belongs to you, with the casual, unthinking ownership of a man who has never once considered that ownership of another human being requires justification. He spoke to me in short sentences. Instructions mostly. Bring tea. Make sure the house is clean before my son's visit. Don't speak when the men are talking. He had 3 adult sons from his first wife, men who were older than me by decades, who looked at me with expressions I couldn't fully read but that made me want to fold myself in half and disappear. One of them, the eldest, Bilal, looked at me on my first Friday in that house with something that might have been pity. He opened his mouth like he was going to say something. Then he looked at his father, and he closed it again. I understood that too. The closing of a mouth. I had grown up watching women do it. I prayed. Sister, I want you to understand how sincerely, how desperately, how completely I prayed in those early months. I had been raised Muslim with real devotion. Not just habit, not just family performance but genuine faith. I believed in Allah. I believed He was merciful. I believed He heard. I made wudu 5 times a day with shaking hands, and I pressed my forehead to the prayer mat and I spoke to God with everything I had. I didn't have eloquent words. I wasn't educated enough for that. My prayers were more like the crying of something caught in a trap. Please, please help me. Please see me. Please make this stop. Please let me go home. Please let me wake up and be 12 and free. And in my mother's kitchen with flour on my hands, and none of this having happened yet. The ceiling did not move. The room did not change. Hassan came home at the same time every evening and I brought tea and kept my eyes down and the days stacked themselves on top of each other like stones in a wall I was being buried beneath. There is something particular about being a girl who prays and is not heard. Something that goes beyond ordinary loneliness. When I was small, I was taught that Allah was closer to me than my jugular vein. That He saw every hidden thing. That not a leaf fell without His knowing. I had believed that with the wholeness that only children can believe. And now I was pressing my forehead to the mat twice, 3 times, sometimes weeping so hard I couldn't complete the words, and there was nothing. Nothing. Not cruelty. Not a slammed door. Just absence. The awful hollow silence of a sky that doesn't answer. I began to wonder, and I am being honest with you now, completely honest, woman to woman. I began to wonder if the silence was its own kind of answer. If maybe what I was worth in the eyes of God was exactly what I was worth in the eyes of my father. Half. Less than. Insufficient. I had learned in lessons at the madrasa that a woman's testimony was worth half a man's. That my inheritance would be half my brother's. That paradise lay at my husband's feet, and I could only enter it through his satisfaction. That I had been created from a crooked rib. Crooked. Even my origin was described as a flaw. So maybe, I thought, on the worst nights, on the nights when I pressed my face into that foreign-smelling pillow and let the tears come silently because I had learned early that audible crying annoyed Hassan, maybe God just didn't think I was worth responding to. Maybe I was praying into a silence that had always been there. And I had just been too young to hear it before. The loneliness was its own creature. It lived in the house with me, constant and shapeless. I had no friends here. Hassan's neighborhood was not my village. I knew no one, recognized nothing, had no cousin to whisper with over a wall or sister to share a mat with at night. I was not permitted to go out without permission, and permission came rarely and always with conditions. When I did go to the market with Hassan's eldest daughter-in-law, a cold, watchful woman named Raja, who made clear from the first day that she resented my presence in the family, I walked with my eyes on the ground as I'd been taught, and I thought about the girls I used to go to school with. Girls my age who were probably still sitting in classrooms right now, learning things, becoming people. I had been removed from school the moment the engagement was confirmed. What does she need school for? I heard my father tell my uncle. She's going to a good home. A good home. I thought about that phrase often in those early months. I turned it over in my mind the way your tongue finds a sore tooth. Compulsively, unable to leave it alone. A good home. By what measure? By whose definition? What was good about four walls that smelled like a stranger, and a man older than my grandfather who spoke to me in imperatives, and a prayer mat where I knelt and heard nothing, nothing, nothing? By the time I was 13, I had stopped expecting the prayers to be answered. I still made them. Habit is its own kind of faith even when faith itself has gone hollow. I still pressed my forehead down, still moved my lips through the familiar words. But something had shifted in the center of me. Something that had once been warm and reaching had curled itself inward, gone quiet, pulled back from the edge of hope the way you pull your hand from a flame after being burned enough times. I think now that this is the most dangerous place a person can live. Not in active suffering, but in the gray, airless space where you have simply stopped believing relief is possible. Where you wake up each morning and think not today might be different but just today. Just today. Again. Endure it. Survive it. My mother's word. Survive. I was 13 years old and survival was the ceiling of my ambition. There was one Thursday. I remember it was Thursday again. Funny how Thursdays marked my life in those years. When Hassan's daughter-in-law Raja came to the house to help me prepare a meal for guests. We worked side by side in the kitchen for hours and she didn't speak to me much, but at one point she looked at me, really looked, the way women sometimes look at each other when the men aren't in the room and the performance of composure can slip just slightly, and she said, "How old are you now?" 13, I said. She looked at me for a long moment. Something moved across her face. Do you miss your mother? The question was so simple, so human, so unexpectedly kind from a woman who had never been kind to me that my throat closed entirely and I couldn't answer. I just nodded, eyes burning, hands still moving through the mechanical work of cooking, because the body learns to keep functioning, even when the person inside it is dissolving. Raja turned back to the stove. She didn't say anything else. But for a moment, just a moment, I had felt the unbearable sweetness of being seen by another woman. Of someone noting my age and understanding without requiring me to explain it, what that age meant in that house. She never spoke to me that way again. Whatever crack of compassion had opened in her, she sealed it. She had her own survival to manage. We all did. I was 14 when I began on the worst nights to pray a different kind of prayer. Not save me, not help me, not even see me. Just let me go. Let me stop being here. Let me not wake up tomorrow. I am telling you this not for sympathy. I am telling you because I know, sister, that some of you understand exactly what I mean. That some of you have knelt in a dark room and asked God, or whoever might be listening, for the mercy of simply not continuing. And I want you to know that you are not wicked for that prayer. You are not weak. You are a human being who has been pushed to the edge of what human beings can hold. And I want you to know what happened next. Because something did hear me. Just not what I expected. Not yet. But it was coming. It was already moving toward me through the dark, quiet and certain, and carrying something I had never been offered before. My name. Not wife. Not daughter of. Not property of Hassan Al-Soussi. My name. Sister, hold on. Because the darkness is about to crack open. And what comes through that crack, I still can't talk about it without weeping. Even now. Even after everything. Stay with me. It came to me through a crack in a wall. Not literally, though sometimes I think about how fitting that would have been. How perfectly it would have captured what it felt like. Something forbidden squeezing itself through an impossibly small opening. Finding me in the dark. Changing everything. No, it came to me through a woman. It almost always does, doesn't it? The most important things in a woman's life come through other women. Through hands that reach across the space between us and offer something they were never supposed to offer. Her name was Fatima Zahra. She was the woman who lived in the house behind ours, separated from our courtyard by a crumbling clay wall with a fig tree growing beside it. She was maybe 60 years old. A widow. Quiet in the way that some older women are quiet, not emptily but deeply, like a well that has been filled by something you can't quite see from the surface. I had spoken to her a handful of times over the wall. Small exchanges. The kind of careful, narrow conversation women in our world learn to have, about weather, about the fig tree, about nothing that matters and nothing that could be reported back. She had kind eyes. Tired eyes. Eyes that had seen a great deal and had not looked away. I didn't know then what she carried inside her house. It was a Wednesday afternoon in February. I know the month because the cold had settled into the house in a way that made my fingers ache, and I was hanging laundry in the courtyard with stiff, reddened hands, and I was, as I was most afternoons, entirely alone with my thoughts, which had become dangerous company. I heard her voice over the wall. Nadia. I looked up. She was standing on something, a crate maybe, so that her face cleared the top of the wall. She was looking at me with an expression I hadn't seen directed at me in so long that it took me a moment to identify it. Intentionality. Purpose. Like she had decided something and was acting on it before she could lose her nerve. Come to the wall, she said softly. Quickly. I looked behind me. The house was empty. Hassan had gone to the city, wouldn't be back until evening. I walked to the wall. Fatima Zahra reached over it and pressed something into my hands. Small, flat, wrapped in a piece of faded cloth. She closed my fingers around it with both of her old hands. Her grip was firm. Her eyes were serious. Read it when you're alone, she whispered. Don't show anyone. Don't tell anyone. And when you're done, she hesitated. Then, come back and tell me what you think. She stepped down from her crate and disappeared. I stood there in the cold courtyard holding this small cloth-wrapped thing, and my heart was hammering the way it did when I had done something wrong, though I hadn't done anything yet. Hadn't even seen what it was. But my body already knew, the way bodies know things before minds catch up, that whatever this was, it was significant. That it was the kind of thing that, once encountered, could not be unencountered. I hid it under the loose corner of the prayer mat in the bedroom. Of all the places. Under the prayer mat. I have thought about that many times since, and every time it makes me want to laugh and cry simultaneously. As if even then, in my ignorance, some instinct was placing these two things together. The empty prayers and the thing that would answer them. I didn't open it until that night. I waited until Hassan's breathing had settled into the deep, even rhythm of sleep, and then I slid out from beneath the blanket with the careful, practiced movements of a person who has learned to be invisible inside her own home. I took the small package to the bathroom, locked the door, the one place, the only place that was unambiguously mine for a few minutes at a time. Sat on the cold tile floor with my back against the wall. Unwrapped the cloth. It was a book. Small. Worn smooth at the corners with handling. Its cover faded to an indeterminate color that might once have been blue or green. Water damaged along the bottom edge. The pages wavy and soft. No dramatic appearance. No glow. No thunder. Just a book. The New Testament. Translated into Darija Moroccan Arabic. Our dialect. My dialect. Words written in the cadence of voices I recognized. The rhythms of the language my mother had sung to me. The structure of sentences that lived in my mouth since childhood. I opened it at random. The way you do when you don't know what you're looking for, but you're looking for something. I read the first words my eyes landed on, and I sat very still on that cold bathroom floor. Come to me, all you who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest. I read it 3 times. Weary and burdened. When was the last time anyone had acknowledged that I might be weary? That I might be carrying something? Hassan didn't ask. My mother didn't ask. Raja didn't ask. The women who had ululated at my wedding hadn't asked. Everyone in my world had operated on the assumption that what I felt was irrelevant, that I was a body assigned to a function, and functions don't get tired, functions don't need rest, functions simply perform. And here was this sentence. This ancient, impossible sentence. Addressed not to men of standing, not to scholars, not to the worthy and the powerful. Addressed to the weary. To the burdened. To me. I pressed my hand flat against the page the way you press your hand against something real to make sure you're not dreaming. I began reading from the beginning. Matthew, Mark, Luke, John. I didn't know these names or their order or their purpose. I just read. Night after night, bathroom floor, cold tiles, the book hidden against my skin beneath my nightgown when I wasn't reading it. And what I found inside those pages, sister, I don't have words large enough. I will try. I found women. That sounds simple. It is not simple. In everything I had ever been taught about faith, about religion, about God, women were peripheral. Mentioned in terms of rules about us, regulations regarding us, restrictions applied to us. Women existed in the religious texts I knew as problems to be managed, temptations to be contained, witnesses whose words counted for less. But in these pages, these worn, water-damaged, faded pages, women were everywhere. And not as problems. as people. There was a woman who had been bleeding for 12 years. 12 years of ritual uncleanness, 12 years of being untouchable, of existing at the margins of her community, of reaching and never being allowed near enough to be seen. And she reached through a crowd to touch the hem of a garment, such a small, desperate, terrified gesture, the gesture of someone who has been told she doesn't deserve to ask directly. And he stopped. In the middle of a crowd. He stopped and he said, "Who touched me?" Not with irritation. Not with the reflexive disgust of a man contaminated by a ritually unclean woman. He stopped because he felt her faith. Because her reaching mattered to him. Because she, this unnamed, bleeding, marginalized, invisible woman, was worth stopping a crowd for. I read that passage 4 times in a row, and I had to press both hands over my mouth to keep from making a sound. Then there was the Samaritan woman. She came to the well at noon, the hottest hour, the hour when no respectable woman came, which told you everything about how she was regarded by her community. She came alone because alone was how women like her moved through the world. Carrying her shame like I carried mine, in the full heat of the day, hoping not to be seen. And he was there. This Jewish man, this rabbi, this person who by every cultural and religious rule available to him should have ignored her completely. He spoke to her first. He asked her for water. He initiated. He crossed every boundary that said she was beneath his notice. And then, and this is the part that made me press my forehead to my knees and shake, he told her everything about her life. He saw her. Her history. Her pain. Her complicated, not easily categorized, fully human truth. He saw it all. And he didn't condemn her. He offered her living water. He spoke to a woman that no one else would speak to, and he offered her something that he hadn't offered the crowds. An intimate conversation. A revelation. The first person in the Gospel of John to whom Jesus directly revealed who he was. Not to a priest, not to a scholar, not to a man of standing. To a woman at a well. At noon. Alone. I have to stop here for a moment because even now, even after all these years, this undoes me. Sister, do you understand what this meant to a girl who had been told her entire life that she was worth half? That her testimony counted for less? That her desires were irrelevant, her pain was expected, her silence was required? Do you understand what it meant to read that the God of the universe, if this book was true, and something in my bones was beginning to insist that it was, that this God sought out the woman at the margins? That he didn't wait for her to earn her way into his presence, didn't require her to satisfy a husband first, didn't demand her silence or her smallness. He went to the well at noon. For her. I wept on that bathroom floor until my chest hurt. Silently. The way I had learned to do everything, silently, invisibly, contained. But these were different tears from the ones I had cried every night for 2 years. Those tears had been the tears of someone losing hope. These were something else. Something I barely recognized. These were the tears of someone finding a door in a wall they had believed was solid. I started going back to Fatima Zahra. Over the wall, in small stolen moments when Hassan was out and the neighborhood was quiet, I would stand on my side of the clay wall and she on hers, and she would answer my questions. Patiently. Without pressure. She had converted 30 years ago, she told me, quietly, secretly, at a cost I wouldn't fully understand until I faced my own. She had never tried to convince anyone. She had simply waited, she said, for whoever God sent to her wall. Why didn't you tell me sooner? I asked her once. She smiled. Because you weren't ready. And because God has his timing, not ours. Are you afraid? I asked. Living here, believing this in secret all these years? She looked at me for a long moment. Every day, she said simply. And also at peace. Both things at once. You'll understand that soon. I held on to those words. Both things at once. It was the most honest description of faith I had ever heard. Not the triumphant certainty of the mosque sermons. Not the performance of absolute sureness. Just both things. Fear and peace. Doubt and reaching. The terrifying, trembling, real thing. There was a verse I returned to every night. I had it memorized within a week, the first thing I had memorized not because I was required to, but because I wanted to, because the words had attached themselves to something hungry inside me and would not let go. There is neither Jew nor Greek, slave nor free, male nor female. For you are all one in Christ Jesus. Male nor female. Male nor female. I whispered it into the cold bathroom air. I said it against the prayer mat when I made my far. I turned it in my mind during the long, gray hours of the day when I moved through Hassan's house like a ghost. Male nor female. Somewhere, in a universe I was only beginning to believe might be real, there was a place where what I was had no bearing on what I was worth. I had never imagined such a place existed. I was beginning for the first time in my life to want to find it. I didn't know yet what this discovery was going to cost me. I didn't know the price that comes with finding something worth having in a world determined to take everything from you. But I was no longer praying into a ceiling that didn't move. Something had heard me. Something had been moving toward me through the dark all along. And it was almost here. It happened on a Tuesday night in March. I remember the month because the fig tree outside the courtyard wall had just begun to bud. Those first tentative green suggestions of life pushing through wood that had looked dead all winter. I had noticed them that afternoon and stood staring at them longer than I should have, feeling something I couldn't name, something about the stubborn, quiet insistence of green things finding their way back, something about life that refuses to accept the verdict of winter. I didn't know that by morning, I would understand exactly what I had been looking at. Hassan had gone to bed early. The house was the particular quality of quiet that only exists when everyone else is asleep, and you are alone with the full, unmediated weight of your own life. I had finished the dishes, wiped down the kitchen, hung the towel with the careful precision of a woman who has learned that order is the one small power available to her. I had done everything I was supposed to do. Then I went to the bathroom, locked the door, sat on the cold tile floor. I had the New Testament pressed against my chest. I had been reading the Gospel of John for the third time. Returning to it the way you return to a letter from someone you love, finding new things in it each time, things you missed before because you weren't ready for them. But tonight I didn't open the book immediately. Tonight I just sat. Something was different. The air felt different. Not frightening, I want to be clear about that because I know how these things can sound when you tell them. It didn't feel ominous or strange. It felt the way the air feels before rain in a dry season. Charged. Expectant. Like the atmosphere itself was leaning forward. I set the book in my lap, closed my eyes, and I said out loud, barely a whisper, barely a sound at all, I said, "If you are real, if you are actually there, I need you to show me, because I have nothing left. I have been praying for 3 years and I am empty. I am so empty. And if you are the God who went to the well at noon for a woman no one else would speak to, then you know where I am. You know this bathroom floor. And I need you to come here." I stopped. The silence was enormous. And then something happened that I have tried to describe 100 times to 100 people, and I have never once found words equal to it. The room filled with warmth. Not temperature. The tiles were still cold beneath me, the night air still sharp. But something warm moved into the room the way light moves into a space when a door opens, gradually and then all at once, and it pressed against me the way warmth presses, enveloping, total, without a single cold edge. Like being held. Like being held by something so much larger than any human embrace that the comparison almost doesn't work, except that it was the only comparison my body knew. Felt like being held. I opened my eyes, and he was there. I know how this sounds. I know what the careful, rational part of your mind is doing right now. I know because I have a careful, rational part of my mind too. And in the years since, I have interrogated this moment from every angle available to me. I have asked myself every question. Was I dreaming? Was I dissociating? Was I so desperate for comfort that I manufactured what I needed? And every time I come back to the same answer, no. No, because what I experienced that night was not the soft, accommodating thing that a desperate mind manufactures for itself. It did not tell me what I wanted to hear in the way I wanted to hear it. It told me what was true in the way truth arrives. Unexpected, specific, landing in places you didn't know needed landing. He was present. That is the only word I have. He was present in that room with me, and I knew with the same certainty that I knew I was sitting on a cold tile floor, with the same certainty that I knew my own name, that it was him. I could not see a face clearly. I want to be honest, I am not going to describe to you a cinematic vision with sharp edges and perfect detail, because that is not what it was. What I perceived was presence and light and, most overwhelmingly, most undeniably, an attention. A complete, absolute, consuming attention directed entirely at me. Have you ever been in a room full of people and had one person turn and look at you, really look, not glancing, not scanning but seeing, and felt the specific electricity of being fully beheld? Multiply that by everything. By every moment in your life when you were invisible. By every room you sat in where no one asked how you were. By every prayer you sent into silence. Multiply it by all of that, and then understand that what met me in that bathroom was the exact opposite of all of it simultaneously at once. I was seen. Completely. Down to the parts of myself I had hidden even from my own examination. The shame I carried about my body. The rage I had buried under years of required gentleness. The grief for my mother. Not just what she had failed to do for me, but for what had been done to her. The inheritance of pain she had passed to me because it was the only inheritance she had. The small, persistent, nearly extinguished flame of the girl I might have been if things had been different. He saw all of it. All of it. And he was not appalled. This is the part where I have to be careful with my words, because what happened next was not auditory in the way voices are auditory. I did not hear sound with my ears. But I received words. Clearly. Specifically. With a directness that bypassed every defense I had built and landed in the center of me like something that had always belonged there, and was only now coming home. He said, daughter. Not wife. Not property. Not the girl belonging to Hassan, or the daughter belonging to my father, or the woman defined by every man who had ever held a claim over my existence. Daughter. His daughter. His. And with that one word, something in me, something that had been clenched for so long I had forgotten it was clenching, let go. Just released. Like a fist that has been closed so tightly and for so long that the opening of it is itself a kind of pain, a beautiful, necessary, overwhelming pain. I started crying. Not the silent, careful crying I had perfected over years. The other kind. The kind that comes from somewhere below strategy, below survival, below the careful management of what you allow yourself to feel. The kind of crying that is simply the body's way of making room for something that has just arrived and needs space. He did not tower over me. This is the thing I return to most often when I tell this story, because it matters more than I can fully explain. In my entire life, power had expressed itself through height and size and the occupation of space. My father standing over me. Hassan filling doorways. Men conducting their business in rooms women were not invited into. Power, in my experience, looked down at you. He did not look down at me. What I perceived, and I am reaching for language that can hold this, was that he made himself low. He came to where I was. To the bathroom floor. To the cold tiles and the old book and the unwashed face and the worn-down, emptied-out now 14-year-old girl who had been told she was worth half. He came to the floor. And he said, and I am going to give you these words as plainly as I received them, without decoration, because they need no decoration. You are not half of anything. You are whole. You were made whole. And everything they told you about your worth, I did not say those things. I do not see you that way. I have never seen you that way. Sister. Sister, I need you to hear this. I need you to stop whatever you are doing and hear this, because I believe with everything I am that these words were not only for me. I believe he knew on that Tuesday night in March, every woman who would one day hear this story. Every woman sitting somewhere with this playing in her ears, carrying something she was told was her fault, her flaw, her deficiency. Every woman who has been measured against a standard designed to keep her small and found wanting. He did not say those things. He does not see you that way. He has never seen you that way. I don't know how long I was on that floor. Time had done something unusual, stretched or contracted, or simply stopped behaving like itself. When I became aware of ordinary things again, the cold tiles, the sound of the house settling, the distant bark of a dog, I felt as though I had been somewhere else and returned. As though the room I was sitting in was the same room I had always sat in, and also completely different because I was different. Something had been placed in me. That is the only way I can describe it. Something had been given, not taken, given freely and without condition, which was so foreign to my experience of receiving anything that it took me days to stop bracing for the cost. Worth. He had given me worth. Not earned, not contingent, not dependent on my performance or my silence or my ability to satisfy the requirements of the men around me. Just given. Because he said so. Because he made me. Because I was his. I looked down at my hands in my lap. The henna had long since faded from my wedding day. Those rust-red vines that had wrapped my wrists like beautiful chains. My hands looked the same as they always had. Small. A little rough from housework. Nothing remarkable. But I held them differently now. I turned them over and looked at my palms and thought, these are the hands of a daughter of God. Not property. Not livestock for inspection. Not instruments of service for a man who saw me as function rather than person. These are the hands of someone who was worth going to the floor for. I pressed them flat against the cold tiles and breathed. In and out. In and out. The simple, extraordinary miracle of a human being breathing. I opened the New Testament to a page at random, the way I had the first night, the way that had become my habit, trusting that whatever my eyes landed on was what I needed. My eyes found this. Are not 2 sparrows sold for a penny? Yet not one of them will fall to the ground outside your Father's care. And even the very hairs of your head are all numbered. So don't be afraid. You are worth more than many sparrows. The hairs of my head are numbered. I reached up and touched my hair, covered, always covered because that was required, and I thought about what that meant. Not as metaphor. As reality. As the staggering, intimate reality of a God who is paying that quality of attention to me. To the girl on the bathroom floor. To the child bride in the clay-walled house. To the woman who had spent 3 years praying into silence. He had been counting. He had been there all along, counting, waiting, moving toward me through the dark with a patience that made my father's impatience look like what it was. Small and frightened and human and wrong. I thought about my mother that night. I thought about her hands letting mine go in the dark kitchen. And for the first time, not completely, not without pain, but for the first time, I felt something toward her that wasn't only grief. I felt something like compassion. She was also a sparrow. Also counted. Also worth more than she had ever been told. She had been on her own bathroom floor once, I was sure of it. Maybe still was in her way. And no one had ever gone to the floor for her. I wanted to tell her. Desperately. I wanted to press this book into her hands over a courtyard wall, the way Fatima Zahra had pressed it into mine. I understood then what Fatima Zahra had been waiting for all those patient years. Not permission. Not safety. Just the right person. And I thought, maybe that is what I am now. Someone who carries this. Someone who will wait at their own wall for whoever God sends. But first I had to survive what was coming. Because I had changed. Fundamentally, irrevocably, completely. And in the world I lived in, change was not permitted. Especially not in women. Especially not this kind. They would notice. And noticing would have consequences. I walked back to the bedroom that night a different person than the one who had left it. Hassan was still asleep. The house was still the same house. The walls still smelled like a stranger. But I knew something now that I hadn't known before. I knew whose I was. And that knowledge, quiet, hidden, small as a mustard seed pressed against the inside of my chest, was the most dangerous thing I had ever possessed. More dangerous than disobedience. More dangerous than running. More dangerous than anything my father or my husband could have imagined. Because you cannot unknow your own worth. Once you know it, it changes everything. Everything. I lasted for more months before they found out. For months of carrying this enormous, blazing, world-rearranging secret inside a body that was required to move through the ordinary rhythms of an ordinary day. For months of making tea and hanging laundry and keeping my eyes down and saying the right words at the right times. And underneath all of it, underneath the performance of the woman I was required to be, this other thing burning. This knowledge. This name he had given me. Daughter. I said it to myself every morning before I opened my eyes. Before the weight of the day pressed down. Before the sounds of Hassan moving in the next room reminded me where I was and what I was required to be. I said it. Just that word. Just that one word. Pressing it into the inside of my chest like a coal held carefully. Fed just enough air to stay alive. It was the only warm thing in the house. I had been careless. I know that now. I tell myself that I was 14 years old and carrying something I had no experience carrying. And that carelessness was almost inevitable. But the truth is more complicated than that. I think part of me, some deep, tired, 3 years broken part of me was ready. Ready for the collision. Ready for the moment when the person I was becoming could no longer be contained inside the performance of the person I was required to be. I had underlined things. Such a small thing. Such a human, instinctive thing, reading words that matter and wanting to mark them to say here this one changed me. I had used the soft edge of my thumbnail at first, Careful impressions that might have been mistaken for water damage. But then there was the verse in John. I came that they may have life and have it abundantly. And I had pressed so hard my thumbnail tore the page slightly, and I had felt no regret, only the fierce satisfaction of marking something true. Abundantly. I had never once in my entire life been offered abundance. I had been offered survival. I had been offered sufficiency, enough food, enough shelter, enough compliance to avoid consequences. But abundance. Life in abundance. The phrase sat in my mouth like something I was learning to taste for the first time. Not entirely sure yet what I was tasting, but certain, deeply certain, that I wanted more of it. The underlines were what Hassan found. It was a Friday morning. He had come home early from the mosque. I don't know why, I never found out. I was at Fatima Zahra's wall, my back to the courtyard gate. Deep in a whispered conversation that had gone longer than it should have. We were talking about baptism. She was explaining it to me quietly and I was asking questions the way I always ask questions. Hungrily, rapidly, unable to slow myself down, because every answer opened 3 more doors and I wanted to go through all of them. I heard the gate behind me. I turned. Hassan was standing in the courtyard entrance. He had the New Testament in his hand. He had found it, under the loose corner of the prayer mat where I had replaced it after the bathroom, that hiding place I had believed was safe, that was never as safe as I needed it to be. He was holding it at arm's length, the way you hold something contaminated. His face was very still. That stillness was worse than shouting. I had learned that about Hassan in 2 years. The stillness was where the real danger lived. The shouting was just weather. The stillness was the earthquake. What is this? He said. Not a question. A sentence with no question mark. Behind me I heard Fatima Zahra step down quietly from her crate. I heard her door close. I didn't blame her. She was 60 years old and alone and had 30 years of careful survival at stake. I didn't blame her at all. I was entirely on my own. It's a book, I said. My voice came out steadier than I expected. Something had shifted in me in the months since the bathroom floor. Some reorganization of what I was willing to be afraid of. I was still afraid. My hands were trembling and my stomach had turned to cold water. But I was less afraid of Hassan's stillness than I had been before. Because I had something now that I hadn't had before. I knew whose I was. And that knowing, that quiet burning coal in my chest, it was still there. He hadn't taken it by walking through the gate. He couldn't take it by holding the book at arm's length. It wasn't in the book. It was in me. I know what it is, Hassan said. He set it on the small courtyard table with a careful deliberateness that was its own kind of threat. The deliberateness of a man who has decided something and is taking his time arriving at it. Where did you get it? Someone gave it to me. Who? I said nothing. His eyes moved to the wall. Back to me. He was not a stupid man. He had always known Fatima Zahra was different. Too quiet, too solitary, too uninterested in the mosque women's gatherings. He had mentioned it once casually, the way men mention things they have catalogued and filed away for possible future use. Have you been reading this? He said. Yes. The word fell out of me without strategy. Clean and plain and undefended. Yes. I had been reading it. I had been reading it and it had changed me and I was not going to lie about it. And I was not entirely sure when I had made that decision, but I had clearly made it. Because there it was in the courtyard, air between us irretrievable. Yes. What followed was not what I expected. I had expected the earthquake. The shattering of the stillness into something loud and physical and terrible. I had been bracing for it since I turned and saw him standing there. My body doing its learned automatic calculus of exits and angles and how to make yourself small enough to reduce impact. Instead he picked up the book again, turned it over in his hands, looked at it for a long moment. You are going to your father's house today, he said. I am going to call him. And then we are going to discuss what happens to a wife who brings kafir. He said the word like spitting, like the word itself was contaminated, into this house. Kafir. Disbelief. Apostasy. I knew what that word meant in practice. I had always known theoretically, the way you know about a cliff before you've stood at its edge. But now I was at the edge and the ground below was very far down and Hassan was on the phone in the next room, and I was standing in the courtyard with my hands trembling and my heart going very fast and that coal in my chest still impossibly burning. Daughter, it said. Daughter, I am here. My father arrived that afternoon. He stood in Hassan's front room, the good sitting room, the embroidered cushions, and he looked at me the way he had looked at me my entire life, as a ledger entry. An asset or a liability? In this moment, clearly a liability. Is it true? He said. Yes, Baba. The word was steady. I don't know where I was finding this steadiness. I don't know what was holding my spine upright in that room with those two men, and the weight of everything I stood to lose pressing down on me from all directions. But I know it wasn't mine. It was borrowed from something larger. Something that had come to a bathroom floor in March and knelt down and called me by name. My father looked at Hassan. A long exchange passed between them, the efficient, wordless communication of men who have decided that a woman's transgression is a property issue before it is anything else. Then my father looked back at me and his face had settled into something I recognized from childhood. The face he wore when a decision had been made that was not going to be revisited. You will come home, he said. You will be corrected. And then this will be finished. Corrected. I knew what that word meant too. I had watched my sister Fatima come back from being corrected once, moving carefully, wearing long sleeves in summer. And something happened in me in that moment, something tectonic, something that had been building since March, since the bathroom floor, since the verse about sparrows and numbered hairs and abundance. Something rose up from the place where the coal burned and it moved through me like heat moving through metal, and before I had made a conscious decision to speak, before strategy or survival instinct could override it, I heard my own voice in that room. Quiet. Clear. Certain. No. The silence that followed that word was the loudest thing I have ever heard. My father stared at me. Hassan stared at me. I think the walls stared at me. In 20-some years of life I had never, not once, not in any form, not in any context, said that word to my father. The architecture of my entire existence had been built around its impossibility. Women like me, in families like mine, in worlds like the one I had been born into, did not say no to their fathers. They did not say no to their husbands. The word was simply not available to them, the way certain colors are not available in a limited palette. And I had just said it. Plainly. Without dressing it up or softening it or surrounding it with apology. No. What did you say? My father said. Very quietly. I said no. Each word separate. Each word a stone placed deliberately. I won't be corrected. I won't stop reading. I won't stop believing what I believe. You can be angry. You can call it what you want. But I am not going to pretend anymore. My father stood up. Sister, I need to be honest with you here. I need to tell you that what I did in that moment was not brave in the way bravery looks in stories. It was not clean or triumphant. My legs were shaking so hard I could feel it in my teeth. There was a part of me, a large part, that was screaming at the rest of me to take it back, to soften, to apologize, to perform the submission that had always been the price of physical safety. But the coal was burning. And I had heard something on a bathroom floor in March that I could not unhear. You are not half of anything. You are whole. I held on to those words the way you hold on to a rope over a drop. Both hands. Everything. My father crossed the room and grabbed my arm, not gently. His grip was the grip of a man who had never once been required to be gentle with a woman, who had learned from his father and his father's father that female bodies are for gripping when the moment requires it. I felt his fingers press into the soft inside of my upper arm and I thought, distantly, there will be bruises there tomorrow. You will get in the car, he said against my face. And you will not speak again until I tell you to speak. Do you understand me? I looked at him. My father. The man who had checked my teeth before selling me. The man who had poured tea with both hands for the man who purchased me. The man who had told me that what I wanted didn't matter. I looked at him and I said very quietly, I love you, Baba. I have always loved you. And I will get in the car. But I need you to know, I need you to hear me say this once clearly so that you know I am not going back to what I was. Whatever happens next. I am not going back. His grip tightened. He said nothing. He pulled me toward the door. The drive to my parents' house was 40 minutes. I sat in the back seat and I prayed. Not the empty, ceiling-directed prayers of 3 years ago. Not the bargaining prayers of a person in a transaction with a distant God. Something different. Conversation. The kind of prayer that feels less like speaking into a void and more like speaking to someone sitting beside you, present and attending. I don't know what's going to happen, I said inside my head. I don't know what they're going to do. I'm afraid. I need you here. And the warmth came. Even in that car. Even between my father's silence and the road dust rising outside and the future narrowing to a series of doors I couldn't see past. The warmth came. I am here, it said. I have not left. I will not leave. They put me in a room. The room I had shared with Huda, the mat we had shared, the small window with the broken latch that let in a particular slice of afternoon light. Home. Except home had become something else, a holding room. A place of waiting for a verdict I hadn't been consulted about. My mother brought me water. She set it beside me without speaking. She started to leave. Ummi. My voice broke on the word. 2 years. 2 years since I had been in this room in this house with my mother's back to me. Ummi, please. She stopped. Didn't turn around. They're talking about what to do with me, I said. You know what that means. You know what Baba does when. Stop. Her voice was a closed door. I'm your daughter, I said. I'm your daughter and I'm 14 years old and I found something, I found someone, and they want to take it from me and I am asking you, I am begging you. My voice was shaking apart now, losing its shape. Please don't let them. Please. Just this once. Choose me. A long silence. The kind that has weight. Then my mother turned around. And her face, sister, her face. The armor was gone. The mask she had worn my entire life. The carefully maintained surface of a woman who had survived by feeling nothing visible. It was gone. And what was underneath it was devastation. Raw, unguarded, total devastation. She crossed the room and sat beside me on the mat and she took my face in both her hands, those rough, capable hands, and she looked at me for a long moment without speaking. Then she said, almost inaudibly, "What did you find?" I told her. I told her everything. About Fatima Zahra and the wall and the water-damaged book. About the woman at the well and the woman who bled for 12 years and the man who stopped a crowd for her. About the verse that said male nor female. About the bathroom floor and the warmth and the word he had called me. Daughter. My mother listened. She didn't interrupt. She didn't recoil or reach for her phone to call my father or perform any of the responses I had feared. She just listened. Her hand still holding my face. Her eyes moving across mine like she was reading something. When I finished, the room was completely still. She closed her eyes. And 2 tears, just exactly 2, moved down her face. She made no sound. She cried the way I had learned to cry. Silently. Invisibly. Contained. Then she stood up. Wiped her face. Straightened her back. There is a bus, she said, in a voice stripped of everything except bare, essential information. At 6 in the morning. It goes north to Tangier. I have a cousin there, Khadija. She is a good woman. She doesn't ask many questions. I stared at her. Your father and your brothers are going to decide tonight, she said. I know how those decisions go. She reached into the pocket of her house dress and pressed something into my hands. Folded bills. Not many, but some. I have been keeping this for a long time, she said. I kept it for myself once. I was going to leave. She paused. I didn't. Ummi. The bus at 6. She moved toward the door. Stopped with her hand on the frame. Didn't turn around. Take the book with you, she said. Whatever is in it, it put that light in your eyes. Don't lose the light. She left. I sat on the mat holding the money and I shook. With fear. With grief. With something so large and complicated and mixed that I didn't have a name for it. Not happiness, too simple. Not relief, too thin. Something more like the feeling of a bone being set. Painful and right simultaneously. Necessary. Through the window I could see the fig tree in the courtyard. Budding. Green. Stubbornly, impossibly, beautifully alive. 6 in the morning, I thought. I didn't sleep that I left at 4:30 in the morning. Not 6. I know my mother said 6, and I know she had calculated the timing carefully. My father and brothers sleeping deepest before dawn, the house at its most unguarded, the neighborhood still wrapped in the particular darkness that belongs to the hour before the first call to prayer. She had thought it through with the quiet strategic intelligence of a woman who has spent decades learning to move carefully inside a system designed to contain her. But I woke at 4 and lay in the dark and listened to the house breathing, and something in me said now. Not in words. Not in the warm, unmistakable way he had spoken on the bathroom floor. Just a pressure. A nudge. The kind you feel when you've been still too long and your body knows before your mind does that stillness is about to become dangerous. I rose from the mat without a sound. I had almost nothing to take. This is one of the things nobody tells you about leaving. How little you own when you have spent your life as someone else's property. The clothes on my back. The folded bills my mother had pressed into my hands. The New Testament, which I wrapped back in Fatima Zahra's faded cloth and pressed flat against my stomach beneath my clothes, held there by the waistband of my skirt. I want you to understand that sensation. A book hidden against your skin, its edges pressing into the soft skin of your abdomen with every step. Its presence a constant physical reminder of what you were running toward and what you were running from. I felt it with every breath. In and out, the book moving with me, the words inside it already woven into the lining of who I was becoming. I stood at the door of the room I had shared with Huda and I looked at her sleeping shape in the dark. My sister, 2 years older than me, already 1 year into her own arranged marriage. I thought about waking her. I thought about it with an ache that moved through me like physical pain. The image of the two of us leaving together, the fantasy of pulling her up from that mat and saying, "Come with me. There is something better, I found it, let me show you." But she had a daughter, 8 months old, sleeping in a basket at the foot of the mat. A nursing baby. And the road I was walking was not yet wide enough for all of us. I pressed my fingers against the door frame, as close to a touch as I could allow myself, and I whispered into the dark, barely breath, "I'll come back for you. Somehow. I promise." I don't know if she heard. I don't know if I kept that promise the way I intended it. But I know I have never stopped trying. The street outside was dark and cold and empty in the way that streets are empty at 4:30 in the morning. Not the comfortable emptiness of a quiet afternoon but the absolute, slightly hostile emptiness of an hour that belongs to nobody. My footsteps sounded too loud on the stones. I walked close to the walls in the shadows the way I had learned to move through the world, small, quiet, taking up as little space as possible. For once that learned smallness was useful. The bus station was 40 minutes on foot. I had walked it twice before in my life, both times with my father, both times in daylight. Now I was alone in the dark with the cold pressing against my face and my heart making too much noise inside my chest, and every shadow offering a version of the disaster I was trying to outrun. What if my father woke early? What if a neighbor saw me? What if the bus was different than my mother remembered? What if Khadija and Tangier turned me away? What if the mind in fear is a very busy place, sister. It generates catastrophes the way a fire generates sparks, endlessly, reflexively, faster than you can extinguish them. I walked through them, one step and then another. The cold air in my lungs, the book against my stomach, the coal burning. I am here. I have not left. I will not leave. One step, then another. I was 20 minutes from the station when I heard footsteps behind me. My whole body went electric with terror. I pressed myself against a wall, a reflex, pure animal, and held my breath and listened. The footsteps slowed, stopped. Nadia. A woman's voice. Low, familiar. I turned slowly. Raja. Hassan's daughter-in-law. The cold, watchful woman who had looked at me across the kitchen and asked how old I was and then sealed the crack of compassion back over before it could cost her anything. She was standing 10 feet away, wrapped in a dark jalaba, her face barely visible in the dimness. She was breathing hard. She had been walking fast, perhaps running. We stared at each other. "How did you know?" I whispered. "Your mother called me," she said. "Last night. After she called me." She paused. "She said you would need help at the station. That you are 14 and alone and..." She stopped. Pressed her lips together. "She said you were brave enough to do what she wasn't." Something broke open behind my sternum at those words. My mother had called her. My mother, who had never once in my hearing made a phone call that was not strictly permitted, who had spent her entire life within the borders assigned to her, had reached out in the dark to a woman in the enemy camp and asked for help, had done the one thing available to her that wasn't silence. I started crying. Right there in the dark street at 4:30 in the morning. I couldn't help it. I pressed my hand over my mouth and cried, and Raja walked to me and did something I would not have predicted from her. She put her arm around my shoulders. Firmly. Not gently, not tenderly, but with a solidity that said, "I have you, keep moving. Cry while you walk," she said. "We don't have time to stop." She knew the station. She knew which window to go to, which bus, which seat to ask for, window side, toward the back, less visible from the entrance. She stood at the ticket window and spoke to the man behind the glass in the efficient, authoritative tone of a woman who has learned to navigate male gatekeepers without triggering their obstruction. She paid for my ticket from her own money. I tried to give her my mother's bills and she pushed my hands away. "Keep it," she said. "You'll need it more than I will." I looked at her in the thin light of the station. This woman who had dismissed me, assessed me, kept me at cold distance for 2 years. This woman who had her own survival to manage and had chosen, in the middle of the night, to spend some of it on me. "Why are you doing this?" I asked. She was quiet for a moment. She looked at the floor. Then she said very quietly, so quietly I had to lean in to hear her, "Because someone should have done it for me." That was all she said. She didn't elaborate. She didn't tell me her story. But in those 8 words I heard an entire life. A girl who had been where I was standing, who had looked for a Raja at a bus station and found no one, who had gone back and survived it and sealed herself over with coldness the way you seal a wound to stop the bleeding. I took her hand and held it for a moment. She let me. Then the bus pulled in. The seat was cold. The bus was half empty. A few men in the front, a woman with 2 small children in the middle, an old man asleep against the far window. I pressed myself into the corner of my window seat and watched Raja standing on the pavement outside. She had her arms crossed over her chest against the cold. She was watching the bus with an expression I could not fully read in the dimness. As the bus began to move, I pressed my hand flat against the glass. She raised one hand, just slightly, the smallest gesture, the gesture of a woman who has learned to make everything small. I watched her until I couldn't see her anymore. The bus ride to Tangier was 4 hours. I spent the first hour in a state that I can only describe as dissociation, the mind's way of managing more than it can process by going briefly somewhere else, by wrapping the unbearable in a kind of cotton wool and handing it back to you in smaller pieces. I watched the landscape change outside the window, the dark slowly diluting to gray, the gray slowly warming to the pale gold of early morning. Hills I had never seen, roads I had never traveled, the world enormous and unmapped and terrifying, and, underneath the terror, something else, something new, open. The world was open in a way it had never been. I had spent my entire conscious life inside a series of containers: my parents' house, my husband's house, the role of daughter, the role of wife, the requirements of the female body in a system designed to manage it. And now there was a window and a road and a horizon that nobody had assigned to me or approved for me or extracted a price for. I pressed my forehead against the cold glass and I let myself look. I fell asleep somewhere in the second hour. I didn't intend to. Sleep felt like a dangerous luxury, like setting down something precious in a place where it could be taken. But the body has its own requirements, and mine had been running on fear and adrenaline since 4:30 in the morning, and at some point it simply closed its eyes and claimed what it needed. I dreamed about the fig tree. Just the tree. No people, no house, no courtyard. Just the tree in early morning light, every branch fully leaved now. Not the tentative, questioning buds of February, but full, generous, unambiguous leaves. Green in a way that seemed to generate its own light. And I was standing under it with my face turned up. And the leaves were moving in a wind I couldn't feel but could see. And it was the most peaceful I had ever been. I woke up as the bus pulled into Tangier. Khadija was waiting. My mother had called her too. I understood this later, the full picture of what my mother had done in those hours after she left my room. How she had moved quietly through the dark house to the phone. How she had made calls she could not have explained to my father. How she had activated whatever small network of women she had spent a lifetime quietly maintaining, the invisible infrastructure of female solidarity that exists in every culture and every system of oppression, women who help women because they remember needing help, because they understand the geography of the trap from the inside. Khadija was my mother's cousin, maybe 60, maybe older, with the kind of face that has weathered a great deal and come out the other side not hardened but deepened. She was waiting outside the station with the patience of someone who had been waiting for things her whole life and had made peace with the waiting. When she saw me, this 14-year-old girl stepping off a bus with nothing but a book hidden under her clothes and someone else's money in her pocket, she simply opened her arms. I walked into them, and I cried. Not silently this time. Not the careful, contained, practiced silence of 2 years of required invisibility. The other kind. The The kind that your body holds until it finds somewhere safe enough to release, and then releases completely. I stood on a pavement in Tangier in Khadijah's arms and I cried with my whole body and she held me and said nothing, just held me, which was exactly the right thing, which was the only thing I needed. After a long time she said gently, "Come. You need food. You need rest. And then you can tell me everything or tell me nothing, whatever you need. Whatever you need." I had never been asked that before. I spent 3 weeks at Khadijah's house. They were the strangest, most suspended weeks of my life. Weeks that existed outside of time in some way, outside of the ordinary sequence of days because they were not like any days I had lived before. I ate. I slept without monitoring the quality of my silence. I sat in Khadijah's small kitchen and drank tea that was too sweet, and watched the light move across the walls, and felt the extraordinary, unremarkable miracle of simply existing without performance. Khadijah did not ask many questions. True to my mother's description, she fed me and housed me and gave me a mat in her granddaughter's room and asked for nothing in return except that I help with the cooking when I felt able. She was a woman who had seen trouble before and understood that troubled people need space before they need explanation. But on the 4th night over dinner she looked at me and said, "Your mother told me you found faith." I looked up from my plate. She said it carefully, Khadijah added. In the way your mother says things carefully. She said you found something that gave you light. Are you afraid of what it is? I asked. Khadijah considered this with the unhurried thoughtfulness of a woman who has made peace with complexity. I am old, she said finally. I have watched people find God in many shapes. What I know is this. She pointed her spoon at me gently the way grandmothers point spoons. You came off that bus looking like someone who has been given something, not someone who has lost something. Whatever it is, it gave you that. She shrugged. The rest is between you and him. I loved her for that. I love her still. On the 8th day in Tangier I called my mother. It was brief. It had to be brief. I knew the risk of the call lasting long enough to be traced, to be overheard, to give my father information he could use. But I needed her to know I was safe. I needed to give her that one thing. The phone rang 4 times. She answered on the 5th. I knew instantly from her breathing that she had been waiting for it. The specific quality of a breath released when something feared has not happened. I'm safe, Ummi, I said. Silence. Then very quietly. Good. I love you, I said. Whatever else, I love you. Another silence. Longer. I heard something in it that I had heard on that dark mat in my father's house. That naked, unguarded thing moving behind the armor. The book, she said finally, barely a whisper. Does it really say what you told me? About the women. My throat closed. Yes, I managed. Every word. The longest silence yet. Then read it for me, she said. Since I can't. And she hung up. Khadijah connected me with a woman named Sister Mireille. A French-Moroccan woman who ran a small, quiet organization in Tangier that helped women in crisis situations. Women like me. Women who had left things behind that system said they had no right to leave. Sister Mireille had dark eyes and quick hands and the efficient compassion of someone who has learned to do the most good with the least available resources. She sat with me for a long afternoon and listened to my story without interrupting. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment and then she said, "We can help you get to Spain. There are people there, a family, a church, people who do this work. But I need you to understand what you're choosing. Once you cross, the life behind you is very hard to return to. The doors close differently on that side." I know, I said. And you're choosing this. I thought about the bathroom floor. The warmth. The word. I'm not choosing to leave, I said carefully. I'm choosing to go toward something. There's a difference. Sister Mireille looked at me for a moment. Then she nodded slowly, with the expression of someone who has heard many things and recognized something true. Yes, she said. There is. The crossing happened on a Thursday. Of course it did. Thursdays. I sat in a small boat with 6 other people, a family of 4, a young man who didn't speak, an older woman who prayed quietly under her breath the entire crossing, moving her lips with that familiar rhythm that I recognized even in a different language, even in different words. Prayer. The oldest human technology for surviving things larger than yourself. I sat with my back against the side of the boat and the New Testament against my stomach and the water dark around us and the lights of another shore somewhere ahead, and I thought about everything behind me. My mother's hands in mine in the dark kitchen. Huda's sleeping shape and the baby in the basket. Rajah's single raised hand at the bus station. Fatima Zahra on her crate, pressing a water-damaged book over a clay wall. Women. Women had carried me here. Every hinge in my escape had been a woman. Hands reaching across the spaces between us, offering what they had at whatever cost they could bear. The invisible infrastructure of female solidarity working in the dark and the quiet while the men made their decisions in the good sitting room. I thought about the woman who bled for 12 years, reaching through a crowd. I thought about the woman at the well, coming to the water at noon. I thought about every woman who had ever reached toward something in the dark and found a hand reaching back. The lights of the other shore grew closer. I pressed my palm flat against the side of the boat, against the wood between me and the water, and I said, barely breath, barely sound, "Thank you. I don't know what's on the other side, but I know you'll be there. You said you wouldn't leave." The boat rocked. The water moved beneath us. The lights came closer. And I crossed. I am 31 years old as I tell you this story. I want you to hold that number for a moment. 31. Because when I sit with it, when I really let it land, I am still sometimes surprised by it. Surprised that I made it here. Surprised that the girl on the bathroom floor, the girl on the boat, the girl with nothing but a water-damaged book pressed against her stomach and someone else's money in her pocket, that she grew into someone sitting in a warm room, in a life she chose, telling her own story in her own words. 17 years have passed since that Thursday morning on the water. 17 years of learning what it means to be alive rather than merely surviving. 17 years of discovering, slowly and not always gracefully, what it feels like to take up space in the world without apologizing for it. 17 years of Jesus taking every broken, shamed, carefully contained piece of me and holding it, not fixing it the way you fix something mechanical, snapping parts back into correct position, but healing it. The way living things heal. Slowly. With evidence of the wound remaining, and with new growth pushing through the scar. I am not the same girl who left. I am not supposed to be. But I carry her with me everywhere I go, that 12-year-old with flour on her hands and terror in her eyes, and I love her fiercely, and I refuse to be ashamed of her. Not anymore. Not ever again. Let me tell you what the other side looked like. Spain was not paradise. I want to be honest with you because this is not that kind of story. The kind where crossing a border delivers you into uncomplicated freedom, where the past stops mattering the moment geography changes. The other side had its own difficulties, its own bureaucracies and systems and moments of profound loneliness, its own ways of making you feel small. But there was a family. Sister Mireille had kept her word. There was a family waiting. A Moroccan-Spanish couple named Yusra and Daniel who ran a small house in Malaga for women in transition. Yusra made mint tea the same way my mother made it. Too sweet, poured from a height to make it froth. And the first time she set a glass in front of me I cried into it before I could drink it. She didn't ask why. She just refilled it. They took me to a doctor first. A kind woman doctor who spoke to me in French and examined me with a gentleness I was not prepared for. The gentleness of a professional who understood what my body had been through without requiring me to narrate it in full. She said things to me in that examination room that I had never heard a medical professional say. She said, "What happened to you was not your fault. Your body is yours. You have the right to decide what happens to it from now on." I lay on that examination table and stared at the ceiling and thought, this is what it feels like. This is what it feels like to be treated as a person. It felt like learning a language I had always needed but never been taught. The church came next. Not dramatically. Not a sudden conversion scene with raised hands and music. Quietly, the way most true things come. Yusra and Daniel attended a small congregation that met in a converted apartment above a bakery. Mixed Moroccan, Spanish, a few West Africans, one elderly Dutch woman who brought cake every Sunday without fail and whose name I never learned to pronounce correctly and who didn't mind at all. The first Sunday I walked in, the pastor, a small Moroccan man named Hisham with reading glasses perpetually pushed up onto his forehead, was speaking about the woman who lost her coin. You know the one. She had 10 coins and she lost one, and she lit a lamp and swept the whole house and searched carefully until she found it. And when she found it she called her neighbors and her friends and said, Rejoice with me, I have found my lost coin. I sat in a plastic chair above a bakery in Malaga with the smell of bread rising through the floorboards, and I listened to this story, and I thought about everything that had searched for me in the dark. The warmth on a bathroom floor. The woman over a wall with a water-damaged book. The mother who made phone calls she wasn't supposed to make. Raja at a bus station in the dark. Khadija with her arms open on a pavement in Tangier. A woman lit a lamp and swept the whole house. I had been the coin. Lost and searched for and found. And in a plastic chair above a bakery, with tears running down my face into the collar of a borrowed sweater, I said yes to the God who had been searching since before I knew I was lost. Baptism came 6 months later. In the sea, Yusra's idea and perfect. The same element that had carried me across in a small boat in the dark, now holding me differently. Pastor Hisham stood in the water to his waist with his reading glasses still somehow on his forehead and his trousers soaked and a joy on his face that I have never forgotten. And he said the words, and I went under, and I came up. And the Mediterranean was cold and bright and tasted of salt like every tear I had ever cried. And I was new. Now, let me tell you about the healing. Because this is the part one most need you to hear. Not the dramatic story, not the escape, not the miracles in the boats and the bus stations. This. The long, quiet, unglamorous, absolutely necessary work of healing. Because here is what nobody tells you about surviving what I survived. The body remembers. Long after the mind has found language for the experience, long after you have told the story enough times that it has a shape and a sequence, long after you are safe, the body remembers. It keeps the score in ways you don't always see coming. A particular smell, a certain quality of light. A man clearing his throat in a tone that sounds briefly like Hassan. And something in you goes back. Not all the way, but part way. Far enough to remind you that healing is not a destination you arrive at and unpack your bags. It is a road. A long winding, sometimes doubling back on itself road. I want to tell you about 3 specific things Jesus healed in me, because I think you need to hear these. I think some of you are carrying exactly these things and you need to know they can be healed. The first was shame about my body. Sister, I grew up in a world that treated the female body as simultaneously the most powerful and the most dangerous thing in existence. So powerful it could destroy a family's honor. So dangerous it had to be covered, contained, controlled, tested, inspected, sold and managed at every stage. I had been taught that my body was a problem. A source of fitna, temptation, disorder, chaos. Something to be apologized for. And then there was what Hassan had done to it. That which I won't describe but which I carry. The knowledge of having been used. The complex, deeply unfair, entirely understandable shame of the body that was present for something it didn't choose. Jesus healed this so specifically that I am still in awe of it. It happened through a verse I found 2 years after my baptism, reading alone late at night, in the first apartment that was truly mine. 1 Corinthians 6. Do you not know that your body is a temple of the Holy Spirit, who is in you, whom you have received from God? You are not your own, you were bought at a price. Therefore honor God with your body. I had heard this verse before. I had read it before. But that night it landed differently. Completely differently. Your body is a temple. Not a problem. Not a source of danger. Not a commodity for male inspection or male satisfaction or male honor. A temple. The dwelling place of the Holy Spirit. Sacred not because of what it covered or concealed or protected, but because of what it housed. I put the Bible down and I walked to my bathroom, my own bathroom, mine with the lock that only I had the key to, and I stood in front of the mirror, which I had been avoiding for years in the complicated way of a person who is not yet ready to be confronted by their own face. I looked at myself, and I said out loud, for the first time in my life, directed at my own reflection, you are a temple. You are not property. You are not merchandise. You are not the sum of what was done to you. You are a dwelling place of God. I said it 3 times. The 3rd time I almost believed it. By the 100th time I did. The second thing he healed was my terror of men. Not immediately. Not quickly. This was the slow healing, years of it, the kind that involves a good counselor, which Yusra found for me, a Moroccan French woman named Dr. Amira who had her own story and who sat across from me every Thursday for 2 years and helped me separate the past from the present. Helped me understand that when a door opened quickly and I flinched, I was not in Hassan's house anymore. When a man raised his voice in a public place and I froze, I was not in my father's courtyard anymore. The body needed reteaching. The body needed to learn, slowly and with enormous patience, that not every male presence was a threat. That men could exist in a room without owning it. That a man could speak to me without the transaction that used to underlie every male voice in my life. Jesus worked through Dr. Amira. He works through people I have learned through the skilled, patient, careful hands of those he places in our path. Through the counselor and the pastor and the friend who shows up on a Thursday, and through the elderly Dutch woman who brings cake and never asks you to explain yourself. And he worked directly. In prayer, in the quiet, in the continuing conversation that started on a bathroom floor and has not stopped since. Slowly replacing the face of every man who had held power over me with his face. The one that made itself low, the one that came to the floor, the one that saw the woman at the well and initiated. The one that stopped a crowd for a woman who had only touched his hem. That face. That is the face I learned to associate with male presence when I brought it back to God. That face which held no entitlement, no ownership, no transaction. Just attention. Seeing. Worth. Took years. It is still taking years. But I am no longer a woman who flinches at every door. And that is a miracle. That is an absolute daily ongoing miracle. The third thing, the hardest thing, was forgiving my mother. Not the surface forgiveness. Not the forgiveness you perform because you know it's required, the words that sit in your mouth correctly shaped but not yet integrated, not yet real. The actual thing. The forgiveness that has weight and texture and costs something genuinely precious to give. I had loved my mother through everything. I want to be clear about that. I had never stopped loving her. But love and forgiveness are different rooms in the same house. And for years I could love her from one room without being able to enter the other. Because what she had done, or rather what she had not done, the weight of all those silences, the hand that let go in the dark kitchen, the voice that said survive instead of I will protect you, it lived in me as a wound that kept reopening. Every time I thought I had healed it, something would brush against it and it would bleed again. The breakthrough came unexpectedly. As breakthroughs tend to. I was reading about Jesus on the cross. The moment, and I have read it dozens of times, but this particular reading something cracked open. The moment when he looked at the people who had put him there, who had beaten him and mocked him and driven nails through his hands, and he said, Father, forgive them. They don't know what they are doing. They don't know what they are doing. I sat with that phrase for a long time, a very long time, and I thought about my mother, a girl who had been handed to a man she didn't choose, who had survived by sealing herself over, who had been so thoroughly taught that her wants were irrelevant that she had eventually stopped having wants, or buried them so deeply they were inaccessible, who had watched me be handed over because she genuinely, in the broken, limited, conditioned way of her understanding, believed this was how the world worked and that there was no door out of it. She didn't know what she was doing. Or more precisely, she knew it was wrong and she did it anyway, because she had no framework for doing otherwise, no example of a different way. No one who had ever gone to her bathroom floor in the dark and told her she was worth more than survival. Nobody had gone to the well for her. And in that moment, kneeling on my own floor in my own apartment in Spain with tears falling onto the page, I felt the forgiveness arrive. Not as an act of will. I had tried the act of will many times and it always fell short. It arrived as a gift. A thing given from outside me and placed inside me, too large to have been generated by my own resources. The specific, miraculous, unearned gift of being able to hold my mother's failure without being destroyed by it. I forgive her. I forgive her completely. Not because what happened was acceptable. Not because the wound doesn't exist. But because she was a caged bird who didn't know she was in a cage. And you cannot require a caged bird to throw open a door it cannot see. And because he forgave from a cross. If he could do that, then I, held in his arms, taught by his example, resourced by his grace, can do this. I want to tell you about my mother. We speak on the phone now. Carefully, briefly, in the way of women who share a language that nobody else in their immediate lives understands. She has never converted. I do not pressure her. I will never pressure her. That is not what love is. But she asks me questions sometimes. About what I read. About what I believe. About what he said to me on the bathroom floor. 3 months ago she asked me to read her the story of the woman at the well. I sat in my kitchen in the morning light and I read it to her over the phone, all of it slowly, and she was silent through the whole reading. When I finished she was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, "He spoke to her first." "Yes, Ummi," I said. He spoke to her first. Another silence. Then, read it again. So I did. I don't know where my mother is in her journey. That belongs to her and to him, and I trust him with it completely. The same God who moved toward me through the dark is perfectly capable of moving toward her. My job is simply to stay available, to be the wall she can come to have the book ready. Huda got out 2 years after me. She came with her daughter, by then a toddler, round-faced and serious with enormous dark eyes. Sister Mireille's network again. The invisible infrastructure still working, still reaching across the spaces between women. She is in Germany now. She and her daughter. She is studying nursing. She sends me photos of her daughter in the snow, bundled to twice her size, laughing with her whole face. I keep every photo. I never went back for a formal divorce. In the years that followed, with the help of advocates and legal channels I didn't know existed until I found them, the marriage was eventually nullified. Recognized as what it had always been. A child forced into a contract she had no legal or moral standing to enter. The wedding ring. I never had it when I left. It stayed in Hassan's house, in the drawer of the bedside table where he kept it when he wasn't requiring me to wear it. I used to think about it sometimes in those early years of freedom with a complicated feeling I couldn't fully name. That ring. That small, heavy circle of metal that had been a declaration of ownership dressed up as love. I don't think about it anymore. Because Jesus broke it. Not literally, he broke what it represented. He broke the claim it stood for. He broke the theology of ownership that had placed it on my finger in the first place, the belief that I was property transferable between men, that my body and my life could be worn on someone else's terms. He broke it with a word spoken on a bathroom floor. Daughter. That word shattered every ring, every chain, every beautiful, terrible henna vine, every lock on every room I was ever placed in. Daughter. His daughter. And from his ownership flows not confinement but freedom. Not silence but voice, not invisibility but the terrifying, wonderful, completely undeserved gift of being seen. And now, sister. Now I speak to you. You who have been watching this. You who found this video at whatever hour, in whatever room, for whatever reason that feels like coincidence but isn't. I don't believe in coincidences anymore. I believe in a God who moves toward people through the dark. Who goes to the well at noon. Who stops crowds for women who only touch his hem. Who comes to bathroom floors and kneels down. You didn't find this story. This story found you. And I need to say some things directly. Woman to woman. Sister to sister. To the woman who is still inside the cage. I know you are there. I know you are watching this in secret, maybe with the volume low, maybe with one ear turned toward the door in case someone comes. I know the weight of the performance, the daily, exhausting precision work of being exactly who you are required to be while something else burns quietly inside you. You are not alone. You have never been alone. There is a God who knows your bathroom floor by name, and he has been moving toward you longer than you know. Please find help. There are people, real people, networks, organizations, women like Yusra and Sister Mireille and Khadija with arms open on a pavement, who exist specifically to help women specifically like you. You are not too far. You are not too complicated. You are not too much. You are a coin that is being searched for. The lamp is lit. The house is being swept. To the woman who has escaped but is still bleeding. The crossing was not the end. I know. I know the other side has its own darkness, its own difficult mornings, its own ways of ambushing you with the past when you thought you were finished with it. I know the body remembers. I know forgiveness is not a single moment but 1,000 moments, some of them harder than others. Keep going. Get the counselor. Find the church, the community, the Yusra who makes tea too sweet and doesn't ask why you cry into it. Let people help you. This is the hardest thing for women like us. We were trained in self-sufficiency as survival, and receiving help without transaction feels foreign and frightening and almost wrong. Receive it anyway. You were not designed to heal alone. To the mothers watching. To the mothers who are fighting to protect their daughters. To the mothers who got it wrong and are living with that. To the mothers who are still in their own cages and can see their daughters in cages beside them and feel powerless. Your love is not wasted even when it couldn't do everything love should do. My mother loved me from inside a cage and it was imperfect and it was real, and she made phone calls in the dark and pressed money into my hands and asked me to read her the story of the woman at the well. That is love working with what it has. That is love refusing to be completely extinguished even when the system has done its best to put it out. If you are a mother who has the power to choose differently for your daughter, please choose differently. I know the cost. I know what the community will say, what the family will do, what the system will demand. I know it is not simple or safe or without consequence. But consider what the alternative costs. Consider what it cost me. Consider what it costs every girl handed over in a white dress that feels like a funeral shroud with henna drying on her hands like beautiful chains. Choose her. She is worth the cost. To the woman who has never been through what I've been through but feels seen anyway. Because I know you're there too. I know some of you watching this are not child brides or refugees or women fleeing honor violence. But you know what it feels like to be invisible. You know what it feels like to have your worth measured against a standard you can't meet. You know what it feels like to pray into a ceiling and hear nothing and wonder if the silence is its own answer. The woman at the well is for you too. He goes to the well at noon for you too. You are worth stopping a crowd for. The hairs of your head are numbered. Every word he said to me on that bathroom floor, he says to you. You are not half of anything. You are whole. You were made whole. I do not see you that way. I have never seen you that way. I want to close with a prayer. And I want to ask you, if you feel it, if something in you is leaning toward it, to pray it with me. Not because I am requiring anything of you. Not because there is a performance to give or a standard to meet or a condition to satisfy. Just because a door is open and you are allowed to walk through it. You are allowed. Jesus. I am tired. I have been carrying things I was never meant to carry alone. I have prayed into silence and wondered if you were there. I have been told I am worth less. I have believed it. But I have heard today about a God who goes to bathroom floors. Who stops crowds for invisible women. Who speaks first to the ones everyone else walks past. Who comes to the well at noon. If that is who you are, and something in me believes it is, then I am asking you to come to where I am. Whatever floor I am sitting on. Whatever room I am trapped in. Whatever darkness I am moving through. Come here. Call me by name. Show me what I am worth to you. And whatever you ask me to do next, help me be brave enough to do it. Amen. Sister. You are not property. You are not half. You are not the sum of what was done to you or the weight of what was taken from you or the echo of every voice that measured you and found you insufficient. You are a daughter of God. You were worth going to the floor for. You were worth a cross. Go live like you know it. My name is Nadia. And I am free. Grace Haven, you are not property. You are God's daughter.